Hey there, today we're going to be taking a look at the Minisforum Elite Desk UM780 XTX. Now this mini PC is pretty much the most powerful mini PC that I've ever taken a look at. This is rocking a AMD Ryzen 7 7840HS. That is an 8-core, 16-thread Zen 4-based APU, and the iGPU in here is the Radeon 780M, and that is an RDNA3 based iGPU, pretty much the best that AMD has to offer on the market today. Now, I got the bare bones configuration of this system, and I pretty much ended up just throwing in 32 gigabytes of 4800 megahertz DDR5 RAM in there, as well as a 512 gigabyte SSD, and for the bulk of the game storage, I pretty much just use an external 1 terabyte SSD that I actually have. Now, in general, the system itself is actually one of my favorites in terms of design as well. In terms of the back connectivity, we do get the 2 USB 3 ports, we get a USB 4 port, we also actually have a dedicated display port, an HDMI port, 2 2.5 gigabit LAN ports, and the most interesting thing about this system as well is the fact that you can actually configure it with a Oculink port if you have a setup for that right now. Personally, while I think Oculink is fascinating, the lack of any dedicated docks in the market right now for it kind of makes it a deal breaker for me right now. Now in the front, we actually get a power button as well as 2 USB 3 ports and a dedicated USB 4 USB-C port, as well as a headphone microphone combo jack in the front and a recessed reset switch. In general, I really like the I/O that we have going on here. In comparison to Beelink's offerings, the fact that we actually still have the 2 full-size USB ports in the front as well as the inclusion of a USB-C pretty much makes it a better configuration overall than something like the Beelink Sur 6 Max or the Sur 7, and at a comparable price point as well. So overall, I'm really happy with this, especially since we also get the 2 2.5 gigabit Ethernet jacks. That makes this a very viable option if you want a high performance dedicated server that actually has an iGPU that is surprisingly powerful. You could realistically run a Windows VM where you could actually pass through that iGPU and actually be able to play games while still being able to dedicate 2 or even 4 of the 8 cores that are in here to pretty much anything that you want in the background. And I know what you're thinking, that seems kind of like a crazy idea, but you have to understand that the cores in this system are actually really powerful. Taking a look at the performance numbers of the 7840HS in this system in comparison to everything else that I have tested with CineBench R23, the results were very interesting. What we're seeing in R23 is pretty much chart-topping performance in terms of all the different mini PCs that I've taken a look at. The biggest surprise to me was actually just how wide the gap was between the 7735HS and the 7840HS. That is pretty substantial improvements in terms of performance, though it makes sense when you really break down what exactly the 7735HS is. It is effectively a 6800H, and the 6000 series was essentially more of a refresh than anything else, because in terms of the CPU, there was really no improvement over the 5800H. The biggest gains really came from just an improvement overall in terms of its node, so it had slight efficiency improvements, so it was able to actually hit slightly higher clock speeds at the same TDPs, but really the biggest gains came from the improvement in the iGPU. But that means that now we're actually seeing a generational improvement, and this of course also carries over to the single core performance, where you can also see that it is pretty much dominating the entirety of the competition. In fact, the multi-core performance was actually so high that it is not that far off from the performance of the 3900X on my desktop that I actually use to run this entire channel. That's right, this 8-core 16-thread system is able to give pretty much the same performance as a 12-core Zen 2 based system. So there have been some pretty massive gains over each Zen generation, and it's culminated into this system that is in a lot of ways better than my own desktop, because the single core performance performance is absolutely devastating in comparison. It just decimates what I use on a day-to-day basis. And this system is pretty tiny. Now, obviously, it's not comparable because on my desktop I have a 3070 Ti, and well, the 780M on this system is the most powerful iGPU that I've ever tested, but at the end of the day, it's still an iGPU. But let's actually jump into some games and see what it does in an actual gaming scenario. So the first game we're going to be taking a look at running on this system is Red Dead Redemption 2, running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, though we do have the textures set to Ultra, and we are using FSR with the performance preset. And with all of this configured, we actually get some fantastic levels of performance, especially in terms of our 1% lows. The performance here is good enough that if you really care about the visual quality here, you can actually start to turn up those FSR settings, though keep in mind that you are going to be sacrificing that 60 FPS gaming experience, and your 1% lows are going to be taking a hit. But this is pretty much the best performance that I've ever seen of this game on an iGPU, and it really is remarkable. Now, I took a look at Warhammer 40k Darktide running on this system. This is with the game running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, and we're using FSR at the balanced preset. And configured like this, the level of performance that we were getting was actually pretty decent. I was able to play through an entire mission perfectly fine, and while it wasn't remarkable and not really a high FPS gaming experience whatsoever, it still was more than playable, considering the fact that it is pretty much a co-op game. You're not exactly playing against other players or anything like that. The less than 60 FPS gaming experience isn't really going to be the most detrimental, though the 1% lows do dip down lower than I would like them to go. In general, the gaming experience is going to be more than adequate. Now, I took a look at Deep Rock Galactic running with the ultra graphics settings, and really the gaming experience like this was pretty remarkable. Of course, I was using FSR, but it was FSR at the quality preset, and really this pairs really well with the visuals of the game, and it was a fantastic experience all around. Now, I took a look at Miles Morales running on the system here with the low in-game graphics settings. It is not the absolute lowest, it is just one preset above that. We are using FSR with the balance preset, and really in general, the level of performance that we're getting here is really nice. Considering we don't have to absolutely sacrifice everything in terms of the visuals to get this level of performance, this is really impressive. And again, the best result that I've ever seen of this game on an iGPU. I also took a look at PUBG running on this system, and we were using the lowest in-game graphics settings except for the textures and the view distance being set to their ultra settings. In general, the performance here was actually really nice. PUBG has had a troubled history on PC, at least in terms of performance, but over the years it has gotten so many patches and so much optimization that it is actually a very playable game, and this is again the best result I've ever seen with an iGPU. Of course, one fantastic game that ended up releasing this year is BattleBit Remastered. This Battlefield game with Roblox graphics is a really enjoyable experience, and at the ultra graphics settings, it performs really well on the system. You're going to be able to utilize a high refresh rate display without any issues whatsoever, and the 1% lows are going to make sure that you have a very nice and consistent gaming experience. It's really the perfect type of game to pair with a mini PC like this, and I'm really impressed with the result that we got on here. Now, another game that I very frequently like to benchmark is Mountain Blade 2 Bannerlord. Really, the main reason is that it's one of those games that I would actually realistically want to play on a system. It's one of my favorite games, so being able to see how it actually performs in these types of systems is just really fascinating to me. And with the lowest in-game graphics settings, you are actually able to get some really nice levels of performance to the point where you could actually realistically start to turn things up to the medium graphics preset if you'd like. I've played the game already at these low graphics settings for so long that I usually end up just playing like this anyway, and I just enjoy the higher FPS. But on my desktop, I do actually play the game with the highest graphics settings. It's just, now that I think about it, I think over the last year, I've spent more hours playing this game on mini PCs than I have on my main desktop. Now, a game that I just recently picked up that I've actually really been enjoying is Guardians of the Galaxy. And luckily, it also has a built-in benchmark. And at the lowest in-game graphics settings with FSR set to the balanced preset, here you can see we're getting some very nice levels of performance, with our 1% lows staying above 30 FPS, which is around the level that we'd like to see. And considering that it is a single player action adventure game, this level of performance is absolutely fantastic. And of course, continuing on looking at some more single player games here, we have Deus Ex Mankind Divided running with the lowest in-game graphics settings. And we are using DirectX 12, and the level of performance that we're getting out of this pretty demanding title is really fantastic, and the best result that I've pretty much ever seen on an iGPU. That's pretty much the case with all of these titles across the board. It's just really impressive how vastly improved iGPUs have gotten over the last couple of years. After multiple generations of Vega, it's really nice to actually see some performance jumps that are this massive. Counter-Strike 2 pretty much is the most popular game on Steam, so it makes sense to actually test it out here, and here we have it running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, which is what I would normally play the game with. And I did turn on FSR with the ultra quality preset just to do it. You really don't have to do it at all. I just normally end up finding that I can't tell the difference between ultra quality and just the regular resolution. And if it gives me a couple more FPS, then I really don't see a reason to not enable it. But with or without it, you're still going to get some fantastic levels of performance, though oddly lower 1% lows than I was expecting to see. It could be that I was only able to really play on a bot match because of the fact that I have to run this in untrusted mode, and if you play multiplayer with untrusted mode, it can actually affect your matchmaking. But in general, you're going to be able to have a high refresh rate gaming experience with a system like this. I'm really impressed because this is so tiny, and you're actually able to get a high refresh rate gaming experience out of some of the most popular titles in the world right now. Here you can see Rainbow Six Siege running with the lowest in-game graphics settings, except for the textures being set to ultra, and we are using FSR, but it is FSR at the quality preset, and the level of performance that we're getting out of here is remarkable. You're really going to be able to fully utilize a high refresh rate display, and it's going to feel absolutely perfect to play. I mean, look at those frame times. It's practically a flat line. This is really just an incredible showing, and the game itself is definitely quite old at this point, but it's still one of the most popular games in the world, and you're able to actually get a great experience out of it here. Now, taking a look at Assassin's Creed Mirage running with the lowest in-game graphics settings and FSR set to the performance preset, we're actually able to get a pretty enjoyable experience here, though it isn't as high of a result as I was expecting to see. It's really not that far off from where the 7735 HS with its 6800M was getting in this title. So very interesting to see that there is not really as big of an uplift as I was expecting to see here. But we are going to be doing a head-to-head comparison between the two systems later down the line. And the last game that I wanted to take a look at is, of course, Batman Arkham Knight running here with the lowest in-game graphics settings, except we do have the textures maxed out. And like this, we get a really nice result overall in terms of the gameplay, and visually speaking, you're not really missing out on much. Already turning up the textures improves the visuals so much that realistically you don't need to turn anything else up, though you do have some headroom to do that if you'd like. In general, though, it really shows that a system like this is going to be able to do a fantastic job across a wide variety of different titles. And it really is the most impressive mini PC that I've ever taken a look at on this channel. So as you can see, both the CPU and GPU have some pretty nice gains to them, and it pretty much just tops the charts in terms of any comparison with any iGPU though Intel has already launched their Meteor Lake processors. While there doesn't seem to be much improvements in terms of the CPU on that side, the iGPU is supposed to actually be very competitive with the 780M, though Intel driver issues might still be a problem. But this does mean that Intel is now competing at a far better position, and as they improve their drivers, they might be able to squeeze out some meaningful gains here. So right now, at least in terms of the testing that I have done, AMD is holding the crown here, but I am very excited to get my hands on a Meteor Lake mini PC to compare against this. Now, the UM780 XTX is an interesting product from Minisforum. I personally really enjoy the form factor. I enjoy the stand. I really like the blue color. It also does have this RGB logo in the front that's just essentially an image of a tiger. Personally, I think it is interesting, but I wish that there was a way to actually set the color to a solid color. I at least could not find a control for it in the BIOS. I could only turn on the light or turn it off. And considering having it go from red, green, and then blue while the entire body is blue, I kind of just felt like aesthetically it just looks better with it off than having it go through all these random colors that don't really match it. In terms of the actual design, personally, I actually really like the blue color here, and I think that Minisforum actually has a system here that aesthetically is very comparable to the B-Link Surge 6 and Surge 7, where aesthetically I think both of those systems also look very, very nice, and this holds its own while also being unique from them. And as I mentioned, the IO options here are just significantly better. And considering that you can actually get it bare bones and put in your own RAM and your own SSD, it pretty much is a fantastic option. So check it out down below. But we are going to be taking a look at this system running on a large selection of games, so I'm working on that right now. But also, you might have noticed in the video that I actually have the Surge 7 right now. Actually ended up coming in right as I was testing this system, so we're going to be looking at a comparison of that with the Surge 6 Max. So stay tuned for that. I'll see you guys next time.